So these are open-top chambers, so they're for simulating climate warming, basically. So the air temperature inside, if you actually put your hand in, you can feel it really well. It makes the air, on a day like this, it's probably 3 degrees warmer, and if it's not sunny, then it's just half a degree warmer or something like that. So we can simulate basically future warming with these open-top chambers. And then we have plots like this, spread out from low down in the valley all the way up to the top of the mountain.
The Arctic is warming about 4 times faster than the global average, and there is twice as much carbon stored in the soils in the Arctic as in the atmosphere. It plays a huge role in the global carbon cycle. At the research field station in Latnjajaure, 68 degrees north, 16 kilometers from Abisko, the researchers have long work days. This time of the year the sun never sets, and if you are as committed as the researchers from the University of Gothenburg, the work goes on. One of them is Bjorkman.
With these plots, we take plants from all over and move them all around and try and find out whether some of them are better adapted to these future warming conditions than others, and whether this landscape heterogeneity that we have here will actually promote adaptation to environmental change in the future. So that's the general idea. So DO 59-60
yes.
Looks dead. LA 12-52, big beautiful new leaves and flowers. So this one's already flowering here. This is a lutzula. We have these Tomsloggers where we measure soil moisture and temperature and air temperature, and then these are cameras that take photos a few times a day so we can track phenology. So we track the timing of the green up in the spring, and the timing of when the leaves die in the fall, and also the timing of flowering. So right now, one of my PhD students is working on trying to get automatic flower counts out of these images using AI.
Looking at which plants will survive or die in a warmer climate is not only relevant for understanding biodiversity change, but also for predicting how the Arctic's ability to take up and store carbon will change in the future. Plants play a central role in this question.
Yes, so this is the big question that we would like to figure out. I mean, there's many people working on this question, whether the Arctic is becoming more of a source or more of a sink. So right now it's a sink, or at least historically it was a sink. The reason all this carbon exists in the Arctic is because the rate of decomposition is so slow, because it's cold, and the leaf material, the plant material, and also the animal matter that dies does not decompose, and it gets stored in the soils long term. The rate of photosynthesis is actually sort of faster than the rate of decomposition, you could say, and so that leads to the carbon building up in the soil. But now, as it gets warmer, there's the potential for that to shift a bit and for the rate of decomposition to be faster than how much photosynthesis and biomass can actually be created by these plants.
Different species have different traits which will affect the carbon cycle. For example, different plants will shade the soil more or less, which will lead to a change in soil temperature. There are also differences in albedo for plants, which means that some plants reflect more solar radiation back into the atmosphere versus absorbing it and contributing to heating effects. Some plants also grow bigger and will store more carbon, and some leaves will be eaten by bacteria and fungi faster than others and decompose, which releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
So the project focuses on the 3 biggest ecosystem processes that influence carbon cycling. So that's decomposition, primary productivity, and disturbance, which is in this case mostly fire. So when fire burns, it releases carbon back into the atmosphere. So decomposition is basically just turning soil into carbon dioxide. Primary productivity is the plants taking up carbon and storing it in their biomass, in their leaves and their wood.
So this is a machine that measures the gas exchange in a leaf, so essentially its level of photosynthesis. So when we clamp a leaf into this chamber, we can measure at the leaf level how well it's photosynthesizing, so the rate of carbon assimilation. So we can determine that with everything else held equal, the atmosphere and the environment of the leaf is very stabilized within the chamber. And so then we can determine what is actually affecting the level of photosynthesis in the leaf, and then we can scale that up to what might the plant be doing in response to its environment. and then maybe what the plant within its community might be doing in response to its environment or environmental changes.
To understand how changes in the vegetation influence ecosystem carbon cycling in Latnjajaure, several research teams from the University of Gothenburg collaborate closely.
So this chamber on the ground is connected to an instrument that measures CO2 and methane, the concentration that is in the chamber. If it increases, it means the ecosystem is releasing carbon dioxide, and if the concentration decreases, it means it's capturing carbon dioxide. So plants are doing photosynthesis more than respiration, basically.
There's more photosynthesis on a sunny day than on a cloudy day, so to be able to compare the results irrespective of the weather, they use shading nets and lamps that mimic sunlight. When it comes to what influences the Arctic's plants' decomposition, it looks like the decomposition is more dependent on the traits of the plants than the amount of warming.
Warming up by a few degrees maybe won't increase the rate of decomposition that much. A bit, of course, but not as much as you might expect. But if we get this shift towards species with more decomposable leaves, that will increase the rate of decomposition much more, just because they decompose much faster than like evergreen shrubs, for example, that have very slowly decomposing leaf litter. So it's a combination of the temperature and the traits of the species themselves.
To understand how climate change is affecting tundra ecosystems, it is important to collect a large amount of data from many different locations.
The SSF project is a combination of new experiments and using data from these long-term sites that have been collected over almost 35 years now. So part of the effort, the big effort, is keeping these databases up, that the same plot is monitored over time. And that's actually a huge effort, because it's more than, I think it's almost 200 sites in that database. And then each site has 30 plots maybe. And then in each plot there's probably at least 10 or 20 species. So you can imagine that the data gets rather large.
Lapland rosebay, a mini variety of rhododendron, northern bilberry, cinquefoil, the beautiful mountain avens, and moss campion. The species richness is greater than one might think. And in the evenings, there are intensive discussions about species found during the day. Since there are simple living conditions at the station and no internet connection, the researchers use their combined expertise and diverse array of Arctic floral field guides to identify and classify their findings, an important part of the work, but seems more like an appreciated social activity that oftentimes lasts for hours.
These plants are very tough. They can handle a lot, and they can also handle warming, actually. Direct warming they'll be quite happy with, as long as it doesn't get too dry at the same time. The bigger concern is what happens when those species from farther south and from lower elevations move in, because these plants are great at handling harsh conditions. They're happy if it's not harsh conditions. They grow in the botanical gardens in Gothenburg, these plants. But they're not very good at competing with other species. So when you have the big shrubs coming in, most of these species will not tolerate that very well. So that's really the bigger risk to them than the direct consequence of warming. But we have some time before that happens, is the good thing. So I think here it's actually pretty easy to know what to do if we want to protect these landscapes and these ecosystems. It's all about the climate. So what we need to do is stop emitting carbon. That's what will solve this problem. That's what will prevent these landscapes from disappearing.